All right, so we're going to start the webinar. And hello, everyone. I'm Sam Ayoub, the president of the Canada-Europe Economic Chamber here in Brussels. Welcome to today's webinar, how the EU-Canada Strategic Partnership Agreement and CETA can ensure a robust economic recovery. This webinar is also an opportunity for me to present to you Canada's new ambassador to the EU, Eilish Campbell. So welcome to Brussels, Eilish. And I would like to thank all of our partners for putting forward the importance of the EU-Canada business relationship. I thank the Government of Canada, Government of Quebec, Canada Goose, Cible Solutions, Dentons in Montreal, Maurice and Chapman here in Brussels, just to name a few. Finally, I want to share with you a reference book on CETA. You will receive by email a link on how to order the book with a special discount. This book is the final work of Xavier Van Alvermeer from Dentons in Montreal with 2 other writers. So now I give the floor to today's moderator, Melina Howard from Luxembourg. Melina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sam, for those words of introduction, and thank you everyone for being present, and thank you to everyone who's making the time to also watch this webinar and hopefully learn something. And feel free to send in some questions and everything. It's an open conference, so we are lucky to have some very good speakers here. So as Sam mentioned, welcome to Eilish Campbell, the new ambassador to Canada's ambassador to the European Union, recently appointed. So, and very exciting times actually to be appointed. So it'll be interesting to hear your views. And we also have Andrea Collard, Avisa Partners, who will be representing the private sector. And everyone will introduce themselves briefly. So this is just for you to see who's speaking and what's. I have the European Parliament represented by Stephanie Yohn-Courtin. Thank you for also being present. And you are also the Vice President of the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. So your views will also be most welcome. And last but not least, Nadia Nichet, partner at Dentons, international law, trade law. So again, very pertinent sectors here to speak about today's subject, EU-Canada Strategic Partnership Agreement and CETA, how they can ensure a robust economic recovery in those times. So, Eilish, would you like to start and introduce yourself briefly?
Thanks so much, Melina. Can you hear me okay?
And we can see you, which is
Great.
perfect.
Un grand merci, Melina, et aussi à Sam. Thank you so much to the entire team for having us here, and what a wonderful panel you've put together this afternoon, or perhaps this morning in Canada.
Yes.
Indeed, a really exciting time to be in Brussels, not least because we are very pleased with our strong and enduring partnership with the European Union on the export of critical vaccines at such an important time for our recovery. And those exports continue, and they're going to help indeed in the Q2, Q3 resurgence that we're all so much waiting for. So my introduction today is of course in part about myself, simply to say how thrilled I am to be here as Canada's representative at the European Union, to meet all of your members and those public participants who've joined us today. Never hesitate to both learn today, get that publication that Sam was talking about in terms of understanding at a more deep level our agreement, but also, of course, to know that our entire team in Brussels and across the European Union is here for you. I have a strong background in trade, in finance, and very much looking forward to our conversation this afternoon. Thanks so much, Melina.
Well, thank you for this introduction. It's good when we can really feel that someone really wants to be there. So thank you for sharing those words. Andrea, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Melina, of course. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. My name is Andrea Collard. I am a partner at Avisa Partners, a consultancy based in Brussels, specialized in public affairs. I am dealing a lot with competition matters and all regulatory matters in different sectors. And I'm happy today to be here to celebrate 4 years of the CETA agreement. You know, in 2016, we lost a family member with Brexit, but we gained a great friend with Canada. And, you know, as you know, we don't choose family, but we choose friendship. So I'm happy to be here today.
Very well said. Thank you very much. And Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself now also?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, Canada and EU are the best of friends. And with all the excitement over the election of Joe Biden as President of the United States, we forget we have a much more stable and reliable friend and partner here in Europe, which is Canada. And I'm very pleased that I can be chair of the Canada delegation in the European Parliament. We have so many challenges globally to our democracy, to our climate, to our health and to security that we need to act to save the rules-based international order. And I think through mutual understanding, the EU and Canada come to join efforts such as the reform of the WTO and with the appointment of the new Director General in Geneva and the new President in Washington, we hope definitely to restore a strong WTO. And it's also very important to me as I am a local representative of Normandy. You know, it's a region that has so many close links to Canada. I mean, I'm so proud and here, I mean, Canada is not only a friend, you know, Canada is part of the family, is part of the region. It is particularly true regarding the common history, of course, we have with Canada during World War II, but also on the business side. And I think for the company here, we have a big company, Isigny Saint-Mer, that produces the butter you can find in all hotels, even in Brussels, and that benefited very much from the CETA. And so I think CETA is an agreement that promotes openness and prosperity. And happy birthday, CETA. And I think we should make sure that Canada and the EU joint export the CETA model to other parts of the world. It could definitely lead to a recovery, you know, not only recovery for the companies, but also recovery for the climate. First and foremost, we should ensure that CETA is implemented to the full. You know, the trade irritants overcome and the rules enforced for the success of this agreement that continues. So I hope the parliaments in the EU member states and first and foremost in France, because only half of the parliament has voted, you know, the Senate has still to vote. So I hope the parliaments in the EU and the member state understand that CETA is a good agreement, which offers opportunities to business and prosperity to people. So thank you.
Well, we certainly believe that, and now it's our role to make sure that the message gets across and spread the word. And hopefully those conferences also help people better understand the importance of those agreements and why, you know, with the friendship, how to sort of find solutions also long term. But before we get to those questions, Nadia, we haven't forgotten about you. So please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melina, and thank you very much, Sam, for inviting me to join this distinguished panel. I, of course, would like to extend my heartfelt welcome to Her Excellency. Welcome to Brussels. We hope your tenure will be exciting and fruitful. And I also want to say, by way of introduction, that I agree with everything that Melina said about the importance of Canada to the European Union. While it may be a bit pretentious of me to say, as I have no role to play in the European institution, but as a private lawyer advising companies that operate on the vector of European Union and Canada trade, I cannot be more than grateful in expression of the support for the trade agreement, because it has really changed the landscape of trade between the two regions. And also as a professional, I take a keen interest in the regional trade agreements. In the past and over the more than 20 years, I've advised on the matters regarding international trade, of which I spent 6 years in Geneva, 5 advising, working in the WTO Secretariat in the dispute resolution function. And so my keen interest in international trade is also historic, and I take a keen interest in seeing how regional trade agreements shape the relationship between the countries and parties that are members of a given agreement, but CETA in particular, it has certainly shifted gears in how we think about trade and how trade should be organized. And I'm excited about the possibility of discussing this with our colleagues on this panel and answering questions and hearing from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and I think you've certainly said it very well. So allow me to just get into it. And I think first things first is, how has the existing strategic partnership agreement and CETA held up with this actual real crisis we've been all faced with, which has not been limited to the small sectors, but it's has had a worldwide effect? And maybe Eilish, would you mind, do you already have a view on that? Have you been sort of already thrown into you've been in place since October, so I'm assuming you can see already the benefits, hopefully, of having those agreements, and, you know, making sure that the public here and members also present also understand how important those agreements are.
Thanks, Melina. Yes, I think what you've seen is we've encountered essentially the largest, most comprehensive stress test of the Canada-EU relationship that anyone could ever imagine. And even in my wildest scenario planning, Melina, I never would have come up with this particular pandemic and its depth of impact across all sectors to test us. The good news is that the agreement has created the stability, the certainty, and the relationships that have been needed more than ever during this pandemic. That comes out at the macro level, where although we've seen worldwide trade decline by 12.5%, the CETA relationship, Canada-EU relationship, over the last year on our merchandise goods exports, for example, has been very stable. So we did not in 2019 see a fundamental contraction of our trade. And specifically what you saw was that as moments of food insecurity occurred, Canadian oil seeds and other agricultural, agri-food, seafood products came into the EU market in order to supply European consumers at a critical moment when supply chains, you know, could have been brittle or under pressure. The Canada-EU supply chains absolutely thrive. I talked about relationships. That matters because we had incredible investors in, for example, PPE like Medicom, building not only plants in Montreal and Canada and elsewhere for export, but who had also, as foreign affiliates inside the EU, set up robust structures to serve the EU market. And I think, as you know, Canadian multinational companies sell as much through their foreign affiliates, even more than they export. And in our case, you have both of these powerhouse relationships, the exports and the foreign affiliates. It's also been on things like research and development, where you've seen Canadian mRNA expertise in research and development and scaling and innovative pharma as part of the supply chains for Moderna, BioNTech, Pfizer, and others. And so we make things together. That's only become more apparent during the crisis. What I can also share is that we've seen more small businesses take advantage of the preferential rates negotiated under CETA. So I'll tell you, the real test is not just that you're exporting more. And of course, the real challenge came for us in the services sector, tourism, right? Hotels, retail, they've really suffered during the pandemic. And we need our recovery to happen more than ever, because rest assured, when it's safe and possible, Canadians love consuming European tourism products. But that moment is still a few months away. We can't be more collaborative on our vaccine rollout, both across the EU member states and in Canada. But in the meantime, we saw solid, continual trade. We saw excellent innovative partnerships. But I think perhaps most exciting for me was to see more small businesses. So we have more small businesses exporting today than in 2016, 2017. We have more small businesses using the preferential rates of CETA. And here's another exciting piece of news. If they were exporting to 1, 2, or 3 member states, they're now exporting to more member states. They've used the knowledge that they've gained through their individual business relationships and supply chains, and then taken CETA, which is, as you know, an EU 27 member state wide agreement. And they're saying, if I've already got my product ready, and I think you saw what a champion Stephanie is for CETA, if I've already got my product ready for Normandy or France, I'm ready for Belgium and Germany or Benelux as well. So that the data is really showing us the robustness of this relationship. That, of course, takes nothing away from the hard work that we have to do to recover from the last year.
Absolutely, but it's actually a relief to hear that what was implemented before actually held and ensured that the impact wasn't as bad. But in terms of, I can understand, and that would be more for maybe my benefit, but I'm sure a lot of people will have those questions. During this pandemic, the borders were actually physically closed, so I can understand in terms of research, being able to share data or but the import and export with the closed borders, I mean, there's been no impact on there, or because we've seen, and maybe we could also have Stephanie's view on that as well, but within the EU, we also had closed borders, and it's sort of slowly but surely lifting, but the impact, unfortunately, has been felt beyond just tourism and all of this. There's been a real issue. So maybe we could also have your view, and Stephanie also, if you don't mind adding in. And Andrea, Nadia, please feel free to also, if you want to put your views in there, because, you know, private sector and the law, I think this is where we're so lucky with this panel. We do have different point of views, and I'm really interested in hearing about those borders, which slowly but surely lifting, but unfortunately beyond tourism. I was just wondering the impact on that as well.
Yeah, I think we're best placed to hear from Stephanie on this, because she's got the bird's eye view both in the EU and the transatlantic relationship. And then I'm happy to come in after we've heard from the other panelists. Over to you.
Perfect.
Thank you, Anish. Well, it's two voices. Don't hesitate to comment on it. Yeah, well, of course, on the effects of closed borders. I mean, it has definitely impacted business between Canada and the EU. Talking about figures, I think WTO predicts that global trade reduced by 9% in 2020 and would rebound by 7% in 2021. And if you see the Eurostat prediction, that the EU trade in goods was hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, with has significant falls observed for both exports and imports compared with 2019. And you know, I think it's important to recall that the EU accounts for 10% of Canadian trade. And in January 2021, good exports to the European Union decreased by 8%, more than 8%. So all efforts to keep global supply chain open could not avoid that 2020 was a bad year for trade, definitely. I think we have to say it. And financial assistance props up imports and trade. So a recovery is imminent, but a continuation of the pandemic in our region can be worse, even worse for EU and Canada than in the US and China, for example. And still, thanks to I think you have to say, thanks to the CETA, the trade is still up 15% compared to pre-CETA times. So I think CETA at the end, you know, is still a very good sign. And in my region, for example, closed borders had two main consequences. On one hand, it has a massive impact on the tourism industry, as you highlighted before, because I mean, Normandy is very well known, and definitely, I mean, it's very, very difficult. And on the other hand, it jeopardized some companies that could not export as they used to for tourism purposes, but also for business. So definitely a major, major impact on closed borders. That's why we definitely have to carry on and to strengthen the basis for, you know, dialogues, promote and make sure that we have a continuous platform of dialogue, and that's what we are doing when we are strengthening the basis for inter-parliamentary dialogue and to try to deepen the mutual understanding, because we are all facing the same pandemic with different aspects and impacts, but I think we are all in the same boat somehow.
Oh, absolutely. But clearly here, CETA is definitely very important in the recovery plan. So it'll be interesting to see how everything can be improved. Nadia, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, thank you, Melina. I was thinking about the comments from Stephanie and Her Excellency, and I think it's interesting that trade, in terms of physical trade between Canada and the EU, remained fairly stable throughout the pandemic. And if you try to look at why this is happening, I certainly my pitch to you is that CETA is the response. And why is that? It's because parties through the CETA mechanisms are incredibly reacting and reactive to what happens in the society and the challenges the society is facing. For example, the EU and Canada took immediately the steps and the measures in order to facilitate continuation of the preferential trade during the pandemic period. And so there was an increased flexibility in how administrative procedures would be followed to ensure that the trade sort of remained stable. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, CETA has also been conducive to supporting digital trade. That has become effectively essential throughout the pandemic era. And the fact that CETA does have an integrated chapter that promotes e-commerce is certainly another reason why the trade flows between the EU and Canada remain stable. But then there is another angle to your question, which is how these borders have affected businesses. And undoubtedly, I agree with Stephanie, there has been a drastic effect on businesses on the ground. And I find that businesses do generally strive to adapt to the situation on the ground, and they have tried to do this here too. But the biggest challenge facing businesses throughout the pandemic has been that measures of response to the crisis have not been uniform. They are different from one country to another. Some countries close borders, some countries keep them open, some keep investment sort of flowing. On the other hand, the measures adopted are changing rapidly. And so on the one day, on the 1 month, as you're planning your business, you have one scenario pursuant to which you conduct your trade, but then a month later, you have to readjust. So this creates an additional burden for companies. And finally, I think what makes trade with European Union more complex in the environment of in the pandemic situation is because member states do adopt national measures of protection, which again differ among the member states. And so if you're a Canadian business trading with the European Union and you're actually in the physical flow of goods rather than digital trade, and you have to move your produce, you need to take into account whether you're importing into Spain, whether you're importing into Belgium or another country. And so I think all of these factors make it more complex for businesses to adjust, but certainly some have handled it better than others, but it hasn't been without a challenge. And I think the fact that Canada-EU trade has remained fairly stable throughout the pandemic is really a tribute to the infrastructure of the agreement.
Well, that's good. So we just really need to improve on the European side. So Stephanie, you being in the Parliament, we're counting on you, I have to say. Andrea, please feel free to add your comments.
I can only subscribe to what has been said, about CETA and its added value, of course. And I don't think actually, I can add too much about it, but what I can say is that we should actually prepare for what is going to happen after the crisis. And this is the right moment to do it. We need to leverage on what was done thanks to CETA and on what is, the main products where we export to each other, machineries, pharmaceuticals, work with these companies, make sure that, we use the monies that are now injected in the economies, and we leverage those money to make things better after the crisis. And, the best would be also to kind of work together, EU and Canada, to ensure that, if we have another crisis like this, we can work together just to avoid what Nadia is saying, that we have 27 different ways of responding to a crisis. So Canada should call for action and say, I want to speak to one person in Brussels and not to 27 in different people.
No, very true, very true. And you actually mentioned sectors like, well, a pharmaceutical sector, but is it the only sector, or are there other sectors that should be put forward to achieve a successful economic recovery?
From my point of view, you know, I take chemicals, for instance. You know, just to give you an example, the Commission will launch an initiative very soon on sustainable chemicals, i.e. they are changing overall how the legislation on chemicals, you know, the framework. So this is an opportunity, of course, for both sides of the Atlantic. We want a more green, sustainable chemicals, right? And is an opportunity to create new business on both sides of the Atlantic. And it's such an important part of our business that we should all work together to get the rules right, because this will have an impact on how we do business between each other for the future. And not only during the pandemic. I like to focus a bit outside of the pandemic. I'm already projecting myself, hopefully, in a world without a virus.
I think we all are, and certainly hoping for it.
Exactly. So, you know, chemicals is one of them, but there is energy is another one. The EU again is going to change completely the rules this year. They will review all the rules in the energy sector, and this calls for action also from the Canada side, because we are going towards the same direction, and we should make those rules together.
I think it's you're absolutely right, and I think most of us have had actually this view, and whether it be in business but also on a personal note, where we want to be in a greener world. And it's like, okay, so we function differently, we've traveled less, which has had obviously a positive impact on our environment. However, it has had a huge negative impact on transport, on tourism, and so it'll be interesting to see how those sectors can recover. Actually, how, you know, because we obviously want to sort of keep a right balance, but then again, we just can't, or maybe we should, you know, let some of the, like air transport being at the minimum, tourism at zero, we can really see that, yeah, the impact is not only on restaurants and hotels, and there's a real, so I don't know, do you have more comments on this? Because I can see here we have the impact on the Air Canada Transat merger. Would you like? Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, Melina, I wanted to add to
do.
the previous question, since we spoke about which sectors are most impacted.
Yeah.
And I think when I think about the solutions European Union and Canada are working with, I think what comes readily to mind is not so much the specific sectors, although perhaps it's true that such sectors exist, but what strikes me as most relevant to the approach the parties take is that they focus really on the method that they want businesses to pursue in order to make them build back more robust response to crises like the pandemic. And so what the European Union and Canada are both doing, they are implementing the G20 Action Plan, which sort of deals with the twin transition, as it is referred to. On the one hand, we are looking at the green transition of the economy, but also the digital transformation. And if you think a lot about what we are learning from the pandemic and the fact that so much of our relationship, business, social, and other occurs in this sort of digital environment, you begin to understand that we are only at the tip of an iceberg of what the digital environment will present in our actual lives. And for businesses to conduct trade and be ready to conduct trade digitally is incredibly important. So I think the European Union and Canada are choosing the right strategy in how they handle the challenges of how to respond to specific pandemic situation or other challenges going forward. But rather than signaling any individual sector, to which I think we will turn later in the presentation, I thought it was important to mention also how European Union and Canada view the solution in which realm, and it is actually in building a sustainable economy, conducting sustainable trade, and certainly focusing on digital and e-commerce. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I can see Ailish, please feel free to comment. Thank you,
Yes,
Nadia.
I think the previous two panelists, Andrea and Nadia, have really underscored something fundamental, which is, of course, that the environment and climate change objectives are in no way being reduced in the pandemic response. Indeed, I think if you look at the EU multi-annual financial framework, but as well the pandemic relief funding, what you'll see is not only the kind of stimulus effect that you've had in the Canadian and US response. And I really want to take note, I think many of the panelists have mentioned it, small businesses, and particularly those that are serving local communities, are really suffering. And that's, you know, the businesses that we really need to focus on helping in terms of their recovery. And in that sense, member state and Canadian, both federal and provincial instruments, right, on wage support, on the Canada Emergency Business Loan, in financing and supporting the employment or job sharing. All of these tools have come to be incredibly significant during the pandemic. But I think, as Andrea was trying to get us to also kind of imagine what's coming next, you have in the EU both a stimulative response, but also a transformational one, a structural reform response. And in that sense, CETA is very well positioned, whether it's on data and the digital collaboration between our businesses. Obviously, we are very pleased and will continue to work on our privacy and other regulations such that we have that GDPR equivalency and that recognition of the way our systems and data are organized, including, again, on privacy, public health, and the purposes of that data in order to maintain that adequacy with the European Union. This, of course, for Canada, one of the more exciting aspects, I think, of the President Biden transition is to have heard President Biden last week when he appeared at the European Council to mention the Privacy Shield and the need to work on that mutual recognition and improvement, certainly on the US side, on both data and tech regulation in order to meet and understand EU standards in order to create a much bigger market for everyone's companies. So I think that's an area where we have solid government to government and regulatory cooperation. But then there's the exciting point about e-commerce and serving clients and customers. And that, of course, is platforms like Shopify, but it's millions of merchants across both of our economies who have used the pandemic time because they had to in order to become digitally enabled for sales to customers. But that leads its way into fintech, into payments innovation, dare I say it in Europe, logistics and postal innovation, so that we get our products as quickly as possible, but also to enable businesses, small local businesses who are serving clients, not only to have their bricks and mortar store for the immediate customers that walk in, but those companies are also serving, I like to say, kind of behind the scenes. You can't even imagine how many virtual customers are coming in and out of stores that have a physical presence as well. So nothing about our pandemic response should sacrifice climate or the environment. And there, I really appreciated what Stephanie said. Canada and the EU have been unfailing, consistent, strong partners, and we're going to keep going on our climate and environmental ambition. It also has to be an inclusive recovery. And so there, I would really highlight not only women-owned businesses, but in Canada, Indigenous-owned businesses, visible minority and diverse businesses. But I think, you know, here, particularly again in Europe, understanding that there's so much talent and human capital, human capacity to be better included in the recovery. Otherwise, inequality will continue to persist. So that dimension of ensuring that it's also a more equal transition is incredibly important. And again, is where Canada and the EU continue to share so many lessons. And you've seen that consistency of partnership. Finally, that small business recovery piece. So it's environment and digital, it's inclusive, but also that we understand what new small businesses will be created. I think in Brexit, one of the hardest elements has been to make sure that small businesses have the information, the capacity, and the connectivity that they need in order to be successful exporters. So I would just recommend, I'd be given a failing mark if I didn't mention the Trade Commissioner Service, le délégué commercial ici, en Europe, across Europe, in Canada. It's a free service, ready to serve small business, lots of information online. And again, I commend Sam and this panel for creating this event today, because the more we get the message out that these services are available, it's really about empowering and enabling those small businesses to take advantage of the programs that are there to help them with their strategy and reaching new customers.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for this insight. Stephanie, you wanted to add something on the sectors as well earlier today. Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I really do agree first with what Alice has just said on, the focus on equal and more inclusive recovery, and focusing as well on talent and human capital, which is definitely important. And echoing what also the previous speaker said, I think when you look at our respective recovery plans, we have, I think, in Canada and in Europe, two main priorities. It has already been said, but it's, green and digital transition. And I think recovery must be an occasion for all sectors to rethink their business models and to contribute to imagining tomorrow's world. As Andrea also, highlighted, we have to imagine what tomorrow will be and to have in mind these big challenges of green and digital transition. Both, the European Green Deal and the Canadian Building Back Better put sustainability at the heart, of the strategy, and all the sectors that want to be part of this successful economic recovery, I think we'll have to work towards that transition. And it does not only make ecologically sense, but also economically, and it's also a matter of humanity, as expressed by Eilish. And again, if we take the example of tourism, as I think the current crisis represents a historic opportunity to modernize tourism, at least in Europe. We are talking about it. We need to start to consider it as a proper industrial ecosystem with its investment targets, with its human capital, technological innovation needs, performance indicators also, but it's somehow a chance to reinforce the quality, not only the quantity, of the offer, of securing better jobs, of investing in training, in digitalization, in sustainability. And I think we need to have instead of over-tourism or intense seasonality, focusing really on the quality of ecotourism with sustainability and digitalization.
Well, thank you. It was definitely worth having you coming back in on this. So we touched on it. The fact that we're not traveling much at the moment, but online business meetings have put Canada and the other EU states at the same, where there's no distance because everything is happening online. So do you believe that this will be a new standard to connect and develop business relationships, or will we go back to traveling? How do we, Nadia, I can see, please, I'm looking forward to
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melina. So very interesting question. I think online business meetings have become practically a norm throughout the pandemic. I remember that came March 2020, I had 3 different distinct trips lined up overseas. All 3 got postponed and then eventually cancelled. And sort of there was a moment where everybody was just taking in what was going on, completely bewildered and almost unprepared for the ramifications of just, having to stay home. And then everything sort of one after another, you have these virtual meetings pop up. And solutions being invented for everything that previously was unforeseeable as happening over a video conference, happening in the video conference mode. So I do think that thousands of conferences, meetings can be now conducted in a digital format, which is great because of the carbon footprint being reduced. It's also great because it can be more inclusive now, because businesses that are perhaps not as vast and not as was a really important budget for travel expenses can participate in the same amount in trade and find business partners through matchmaking events that happen online. It can also be more inclusive of people with disabilities, because they can now more easily connect to a virtual world. But that is not to say that the virtual meetings and this virtual reality will fully replace, at least in the short term, the need for an in-person contact. And I do think that while the technology is there, I think the reality of still our generation, which is sort of over 40 and older, we're so much in need of this personal interaction that I don't think this will be a world that we will completely espouse as a total replacement for an in-person communication and conducting business life. On the other hand, I think long-term, perhaps younger generations will assume or adopt a virtual reality as a way of exchanging with one another more eagerly. I certainly am not prepared to abandon it. But in terms of how business meetings can resume sort of in a real physical manner, it is clear in my mind that the governments, of course, in Canada, in the EU, need to have a plan for two things to happen. There has to be a plan for easing of travel restrictions, where certain conditions are met to allow a safe and sanitary conditions allow for safe travel, or where the restrictions are still in place, that you have to have a plan to adapt in terms of eventual vaccine spread, and adjust accordingly to the process being made on the ground, the measures of imposing travel restrictions and easing them out eventually, so that the air travel can resume and a more physical travel, even by train, can become not just for essential reasons, but any cultural, personal, and so on and so forth.
And I think you said something which is very right. We are, and most of us, and I think even the majority, I think, of the members and the public present here, we are all very, well, we come from a world where we've done a lot of meetings in person. And I do hope and strongly believe that everyone that will come onto the market nowadays will also feel the need to meet. Because if you look at an event like today, I mean, it's amazing because we can actually have this meeting. No one has had to physically travel, everyone prepared before, but we've been saved a lot of time. However, we don't get to see the 65 participants here present, and which is a shame, because when you take a coffee break or you actually exchange different views, you get to meet different people, and you get to, I don't know, exchange ideas, but also develop some kind of businesses, or maybe, so it's just finding the right balance in terms of, yes, living in a much greener world, but also making sure that, sectors don't completely collapse, although they need to adapt so we can move forward in this new world. But I should hope that we come back to being able to actually meet physically in person and meet new people, because we tend to now only exchange with people outside of business, where we get to meet different people, but within private lives, you're always meeting the same people because you don't obviously want to spread or take any risks. So it'll be interesting to see where all of this goes.
Melina, can I briefly comment on another thing that sort of occurred to me as you were speaking? So remember that now it's not just external meetings that happen in this virtual reality and digitally. It's also internal business meetings that happen in this environment.
True.
And I think there is another thing happening also, and I'm increasingly adopting it also as a rule for my team, because we develop a Zoom fatigue or WebEx fatigue throughout the week, because we have these calls all the time and we barely manage to, see to our natural needs or to our kids, or they integrate into our personal life so intensely. So basically I'm calling in from my home office. Welcome, by the way, to everybody who I don't see, but you're most welcome. But I think it is also important to consider the fact that we may need to allow some also relaxation into how often and how frequent we make these virtual encounters, because it is also quite tiring for individuals to constantly be in this digital reality and world. So in my team, we've introduced 1 day of no virtual meetings. You still work, but you are not obliged. If you want to sit in your pajamas, you're more than welcome. And I know that my team members profit and enjoy it extensively. But I would like to hear also the views of my esteemed colleagues on the panel on this issue. That would be
Andrea?
Yes, I can jump in there. I mean, to be honest, I think these problems relate to everybody and everywhere. You know, it's not only Canada, unfortunately. So to me, the question here is how digital transformation will help Canadian companies and European companies to meet each other's and avoid maybe in the future traveling. And that, I think the pandemic helped. And where we could have another thing is, for instance, I'm building up on what Eilish said about the délégué commercial. I'm trying to do a bit more of advertisement on that. I think, you know, there we should work on also on the digital way of putting together demand and supply. So a platform where you can make it easy for small and medium enterprises to get access to the information, get access to the other side of the Atlantic. So instead of trying to, you know, going yourself to Canada, in the future, people will be probably more open to do this through a digital means. That leads me to another point I wanted to make, is that in my job, one of the problems that SMEs, but also big companies have, is how to get funds from European institutions, and I assume it's the same in Canada. I don't know if it's the same or not, but in Europe, it's a real issue. So SMEs and also big companies, they come to us and say, help us to get the recovery fund money, help us to get the Horizon 2020 money, because it is complicated. And there also digital transition could help companies to facilitate this process. And I'm speaking against my own interest because I would lose business. But I think it's better for society overall.
Well, that's fair enough. And actually, talking of digital transformation, how CETA can help companies adapting and capitalizing on this new economic reality? Who would like to answer this question? Can I see maybe Eilish? Thank you. We'll hear you.
You know, a few thoughts, because I think, again, the good news is that CETA helped prepare the ground for some of where we are today. And that, of course, includes the work on digital trade and enabling e-commerce. It includes all of the little integrative elements, from certification to temporary entry, which I think all of your panelists have done a great job explaining, you know, what a different year this has been. And I really want to say, Nadia, I'm with you. Zoom budgets, Zoom fatigue, you know, the need for exercise. Just, you know, to be personal here for a moment, we went into a lockdown in Canada in March, and I had our 2 primary school age children with us at home. I say virtual school in loose terms, from March until September. So, you know, working parents were really crushed by the early phase of this pandemic, and you know, we all need that time to recover. I think in particular, we've also noticed a she session, right? Women have been hit far harder, because usually when there's one person who's got to adapt their schedule or adjust during this, and I think, you know, Stephanie talked about it, the uncertainties is really what's also harming businesses, but all the knock-on effects that has for all of us in our workplaces. So I really empathize with all of those points, but then we get to, okay, so how are we set up here? We've got digital, we've reduced costs. You know, let's come back to some of the basics of the agreement. We've reduced costs, and hopefully what that does, if you're not spending your time on paperwork and you're not paying taxes on imports or exports of inputs, for your business, you can take that money and invest it in digital. Take advantage of every program that Stephanie has described, from the Normandy and regional governments to the French national governments to Canadian, provincial, and federal governments, and your banks. And for example, Business Development Canada, BDC, our small business financing bank, who wants to help companies with their digitization plans. But then CETA, we have this temporary entry provision. We think it's one of the secret elements, one of the secret sauces of the agreement, because it's going to allow people to adapt their work in teams, move in and out of European Union member states and Canada. And of course, don't forget, in Canada, because we're so open to the US, this offers the opportunity for American teams to come up to Canada. We also have, of course, our trade agreements in the Trans-Pacific Partnership with Japan, Australia, and others. And when you combine all of this, it creates an amazing hub for talent and integration of teams, again, even from a temporary perspective. And it won't be long. It'll be 2022, we hope, when some of those elements will come back into play. But I think at the same time, we could have a new breakthrough. Let's look forward here in terms of mutual recognition of professional accreditations. So architects could be the first profession agreed to under CETA, where we have this collaborative framework for recognizing the credentials of EU and Canadian professionals. So you see, it's that kind of level of appreciating each other's expertise and regulatory standards, unleashing the talent that we both have, and then being open to the digital and sometimes disruptive elements with good, strong state support on the social, health, and childcare sides that then enable people to get back into the labor market and apply their talents. We're going to see clean tech opportunities, again, not just in the short term, but we have the just transition funding for climate change and climate action across the EU, where we know some member states have real changes to make in their energy mix. Canada is a renewable power a powerhouse. We produce the second most amount of renewable power, clean power in the world, but we've got lots of work to do on our side as well. And that again is going to combine some of these digital talent, because none of this complicated equipment, either in the installation or maintenance, comes without the need to create those human linkages on an ongoing business between your company and your service provider. I hope that gives you some...
No, it gives us actually a really good insight. And I think, Stephanie, you wanted to intervene, please.
Well, I'd like to second what Alice has just said. And like her, I'd like to see the cup as being half full, because I think definitely digitization puts an end to the geographical distances. Physical become much less important and creates opportunities for digitally smart companies. And CETA, as already said, has provided dialogues on all fields, also a digital dialogue, because the first meeting already in 2019 focused on emerging priorities and already includes artificial intelligence, blockchain, and quantum computing. So, I think trust is key in the digital world. And whatever, the geographical distance, whatever you are located, I think really the key issue is trust, and companies who want to use the full potential of digital developments need to instill trust in their partnership and in customers, in consumers. And Canada and the EU are cooperating, on human-centric artificial intelligence and other digital developments to achieve that goal. So I think it's just a tendency which used to be pre-existing before the pandemic, and I think the crisis has accelerated and somehow highlighted, all these ongoing challenges of the digitalization and the transition.
Very rightly said, actually. Those are definitely challenges. And actually, talking of challenges, just sort of going back a step back, the road to recovery, because there has been an impact. And the question here being, recovery will expose large stocks of non-performing loans. What is a recovery vision for the banking sector? Because indeed the road of recovery, we just need to make sure we don't forget about this aspect. So who wants to go on this one? Stephanie, do you want us to go on this?
Yeah, well, on NPL, on non-performing loans, in the banking sector, which is definitely a crucial issue, I see three priorities. The first is, I think we need to anticipate the rise of NPLs linked to the COVID crisis. And I think we all agree we should maintain the support to our economy as long as necessary. However, we also need to anticipate the gradual phase out of support measures, which could lead to rising insolvencies and therefore rising NPLs levels. So banks need to perform detailed analysis of their loan portfolio to identify potential NPS and suggest, I think they should suggest right now, alternative solution in advance of insolvency. So this is the first issue, the anticipation. Also, at the same time, we need to manage the existing and future stock of NPLs. Ahead of the COVID crisis, the overall NPL level in the European Union was significantly decreasing. Also, some regional difference exists, notably with higher levels in Italy, for example. And I think we should build on the experience gained in the past decade to continue to decrease the existing NPL stock and to manage at the same time the future stock of NPL linked to COVID. So the action plan that the European Commission presented last December provides for a strong basis for this discussion, taking stock of the past and manage already the future stock of NPLs. And also, last but not least, the third priority, I think, is to protect and inform consumers. One of the pillars of NPL management is to allow banks to free up their balance sheets and continue to offer loans. And in some instances, banks can use financial techniques such as securitization or factoring. And in other circumstances, NPLs can be transferred to other entities, and we need to ensure that consumers are aware of these transfers and that these consumers remain covered by strong consumer protection rules. This is a high risk, and this will be at the core of the directive on credit purchasers and credit services, also called NPL Secondary Market Directive, and they are currently negotiated in trilogues. So it's definitely really important to make sure that we take stock from the past, we just anticipate the future and make sure that we carry on protecting the consumers.
Yeah, this is definitely an important point, especially as you mentioned, communication. A well-informed consumer makes a whole difference. Nadia, do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, just to add, so in addition to the paper published by the Commission on the NPLs, what we also know they've adopted a set of other measures that go sort of beyond, because I think to credit of the European Union and the Commission as an institution, they want to see the holistic picture of what's going on. And knowing how exposed to risks the banking sector is, they've also adopted the banking package that allows some flexibility to certain EU rules. They adopted a capital recovery package, which aims to increase banks' capacity to finance the recovery, including removing certain regulatory barriers that are integrated into the EU law, particularly in scrutinizing the NPL. But what is also interesting, I think it's not to be forgotten, is that the Commission is aware that there may be a lot at stake, and where needs be, they can look at triggering EU state aid mechanisms to provide support to the financial institutions if needs be. So the fact that possibility is integrated into the Commission's view of how to really handle these loans, that would be that shows that they're not numb or unaware of the challenges facing the banking sector.
Okay, and just to add for those watching, if there will be some links which will be emailed for additional information on all of the various topics which have been addressed today. So we'll circulate those, I think, in this group, or Samuel will email this around. I can see an hour has already just flown by, so I'm just going to quickly double check if there are really some points before we go on to the questions from the panel. What would they do? I apologize. I'm usually very, I've just seemed to have lost my words.
Melanie, if it helps you,
please, please feel free. I'm just need,
Yeah, for sure. Take a moment and take a look at your notes and what you want to ask next, because I noticed in the chat, there was a really interesting question about launching a personal health and monitoring app and the coronavirus, updating passports. And I just wanted to take a quick stab at this. And we have other experts that can help us, but maybe I'll just take a quick glance at this one, because I think it's really important. I'm hearing lots of entrepreneurs and digital experts ask me questions about this. Let me say a few things. The first is, Canada has its own coronavirus alert app, and there's also an EU-wide app, which of course helps you if you've had a positive test, enter that information and anonymously send that information out in order to let people who may have been in your proximity know that you've tested positive. And so there's two parallel technologies going on here. But the good news is both entities, the EU and Canada, are kind of on the digital bicycle. Separately, Canada has an Arrive Can app. And what you'll find is that the EU similarly, or member states, as you arrive, also want you to download an app to make sure that you're alerting the proper authorities as to your whereabouts, whether you've had your test, how your quarantine is going. So we're all on the digital bicycle. The challenge is, of course, we are riding different bicycles right now. And there are a number of initiatives, including in the private sector. One of the ones that I'm most familiar with is the World Economic Forum Common Pass. This is an attempt also in partnership with the private sector to get a kind of standard data architecture put together and propose that for interoperability of these apps and information. I think the important aspects are, first of all, the EU itself has not landed on what a vaccine certificate, and by the way, if you deal with consular people, consular experts, I should say, including those incredible CBSA and consular experts on my team, this is the Canadian Border Service Agency, they'll tell you don't use the word passport, because there's only one passport and that's your national passport. But of course, everyone wants to know, if I have a piece of paper that says I have antibodies or I have my vaccine certificate, right now we're all showing up with pieces of paper at the airport, and it's up to the incredibly hardworking airline staff to assess this, and I can only imagine the stress that creates at the check-in point. So we're all working on digitizing this. The EU Commission is making various proposals. The EU member states have had very vigorous conversations about this in the European Council. So we need to see how the EU resolves how they want to work their interoperability. It's going to come on in North America. We're going to see, of course, with the US in its massive vaccination program coming up, that they'll have their own system for tracking the accreditation and certification of vaccines, who's had them, who can get on the flight. So bear with us, but those in that technology space would be well advised to look on buy and sell. I take note on Andrea had an excellent point about digitizing some of these marketplaces. Buy and Sell Canada is certainly where you're going to see the federal government reach out for improvement. The Canadian Digital Service with the provincial digital services is working on our apps, and it really would be a wonderful vision to see the EU and Canada work together on interoperability on what we know will be so critical to getting business and travel going again, particularly in 2022 for sure, when we know that travel will be safe and healthy. I hope that helps, Melina.
That helps, and thank you very much for giving me a chance to just catch up on everything. And I think actually those views are important, and it'll be interesting to see actually how within Europe we can all agree on this vaccine certificate. And you're quite right to use a new word, because we have been using the vaccine passport, but a vaccine certificate, yeah, we need to have more this, everyone needs to agree within Europe, but at least we have a very strong partner to exchange with. And Nadia, you wanted to add something on this.
Definitely. So I think this is a very relatively fresh piece of information about this certificate. But what we know about it is that it will include not only individuals who have had a vaccine, but also those who have been who have recovered from COVID. So you will have ability to avail yourself of this certificate even if you have not been received a vaccine. So that's interesting. Also, the terms have been widely discussed, and certificate seems like a more innocent of the solutions. But ultimately, I think to the question that was asked from Belgium by Mr. or Ms. Pop about the application, I find the way Belgium handled this is quite interesting. And I don't know if you have had a personal contact with the Belgian system of the app that sort of notifies you if you have come into contact with one of the individuals who has been infected or detected as having vaccine. But what is admirable about this system is that integrated into it are very strict privacy controls. So if the system or the application notifies you of a certain risk, you never know where the risk originates from. But if you, for instance, take public transportation and you have on your phone an application that helps detect your exposure to risk, that application will communicate with another person's application on the same transport, and you will know whether or not you have come into proximity with somebody who had a COVID test. So I think that development, while initially in Belgium considered quite risky from the privacy perspective, has been implemented in a very sound fashion, I find. So just a few thoughts on the practical aspect of it from Belgium. Over to my colleagues.
Andrea and Stephanie, did you want to add something on this topic? So if you do, just you can unclick and so we can hear you. So Stephanie, here you are.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, Melina. Just to add a couple of comments on what Nadia said on, this digital green certificate, which has just been proposed by the European Commission, and it will definitely help, to allow European citizens to facilitate safe free movement inside the EU. And it's definitely a proof, as Nadia said, that a person has been vaccinated against COVID, received a negative test, or recovered from the COVID. And I think it would also help, us to swiftly get back to normal and businesses to reopen as well. So you may be aware that the European Parliament will analyze it quickly, so we can get an agreement as soon as possible, because the European Commission wanted the certificate to be released by the 15th of June. So, and the European Parliament has just agreed to adopt it, or not, but to use the fast track procedure. So we should be called to vote on it within the next few weeks. So, and as Nadia underlined, there are some privacy issues as well, and so it's quite difficult, but so far the European Commission does not want to make this certificate compulsory, so everybody will be free to use and have this certificate or not, but so let's see how it goes before the European Parliament then.
It'll be interesting to follow up, and I'm looking at the time. So just to come back, and I will ask each and everyone to take the time to give their view on this. But so if we're looking at the robust economic recovery, and what year we've been through and everything we've learned from it, the good and the matters that can be improved. So what role CETA can play to ensure businesses of Canada and the EU to be more solid and being able to adapt to future crises? Because I'm afraid while we're going through one, we're going to come out the other end, that we know. But what have we learned, and how CETA's role in all of this? Who wants to start and open the floor? Andrea.
Yes. Very briefly, I think we said it, a lot of it already. But I think what we need to focus is really and I build up on what Eilish said on SMEs, because those are the 90% of our both actually markets, and this is where we will make the difference in the long term. So and if you prepare those SMEs in the long term, you will better prepare also the next crisis. Then this specific crisis, we have said it, we need to cooperate more on the possible, let's call it passport, just for the sake of it, a joint passport, a joint certificate between Canada and the EU, but also going beyond that. So and then for me, I go back to where I started. We need to work on where we are also doing things in a good way. And those are the sectors and products that we are selling already to each other and where we are doing great. And this is machinery, cosmetics. We need to work on those and to make them actually, to make them become our role models. How, we will help each other becoming better at what we are doing to sell not only to each other, but also to sell outside the EU and Canada. So, voila, that's a bit my view.
That's a good view, and I think it's as you said, is to focus on the good and to make sure that we really build on that. Nadia.
Thank you, Melina. Quickly, I think CETA is already playing this significant role. So to the point about SMEs, I think it's amazing what has been done in the last couple of years. Not only is there a strategy to enhance the use of CETA by SMEs, but there has been a whole campaign put together by the European Commission in particular, where positive stories are being shared about successes of small and medium-sized enterprises in the EU accessing Canadian market and vice versa. So I think I agree with the question. I agree with the answer. I would only change the tense. I think this is already happening. It's a work in progress, and it will continue. Same applies to trade being more inclusive of everybody. I think the gender equality built into the CETA and the need for inclusive trade is certainly it becomes a value. It not only becomes a solution, it becomes a value that both parties share, and that cannot be, does not and will not be taken lightly. I think on the practical level, of course, the massive effect of cutting all the customs duties for imports between the Canada and the EU and the movement of goods has had a tremendous effect. In fact, the arrangement is perhaps one of the most expensive trade deals ever committed to by the European Union, leave alone the Brexit agreement. But also helping businesses save money on the import duties that Eilish has mentioned. And I think one other aspect that is interesting, I think the fact, and we haven't discussed a lot about public procurement, but the fact that European businesses can now compete for Canadian government contracts in Canada and vice versa is another area where we will see a lot of movement and exchange between the two parties to the agreement, because I think ultimately when it comes to these contracts, EU and Canada are indifferent as to the origin. They simply want to get the best contract possible for the goals pursued in the government procurement. So we'll see more of that on the ground going forward.
Good. So we, Andrea, we've heard. Stephanie, have we heard? Would you like to give your views on this as well? And I can see some questions coming in as well from the outside, so we'll address those. But before we close that question, Stephanie, did you want to add something or?
Yeah, really short remarks, and I don't want to preempt all the time because we still have 15 minutes.
15 minutes, yes.
Yeah, the role of CETA, definitely the past year has shown that we need to avoid dependencies and promote diversification, and I think CETA helps Canada and the EU to diversify supply chains, towards trustworthy parties which are committed to free trade, and CETA has already expressed, has definitely strengthened EU-Canada cooperation in the WTO in favor of a rules-based multinational order. So I definitely think that CETA has to be highlighted, you know, as a reference for any other potential partnership. And CETA's regulatory cooperation definitely allows Canada and the EU to maximize their influence on the global standard setting. So I think it's definitely a very good tool, and I think we should promote it more and communicate more on it.
I think definitely we come back to communication. People really need to hear about it more. They need to hear about its positive effects and hopefully have a wider impact worldwide, but to at least demonstrate with the positive impact here and how it's helped actually ride this wave and make us stronger for the next steps, then it's yeah, it will definitely help. We definitely need to be doing more of those well, communications. Eilish, would you like to add something on this?
If you don't mind, Melina, I think it's also something I'd like to comment on and crosswalk it to one of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, please.
You know, there's been some questions about cultural aspects between Canada and Europe and doing business culturally across all kinds of obviously different linguistic and cultural affinities. And I think what I want to just share is three things. First of all, get involved in your local chambers of commerce, get involved in your local business associations like the group sponsoring today. Sam and his team have all kinds of advice to provide to you. You're not alone. And secondly, ask for a business mentor. Ask for someone to help you develop your strategy. And that includes, of course, I think having Andrea here is incredibly important, because what works in a North American context for communications doesn't always translate so easily into a European context. I can give you one simple example. In Canada, I think we're very proud of our environmental track record. One of the great benefits of doing business with a Canadian is if we say we're going to do something, we do it. A high trust and trustworthiness factor. And we talk a lot about our environmental regulations and, of course, things like recycling. And when I arrived in Europe, of course, I'd heard this term before, but everywhere I went, I kept hearing about the circular economy. And I kept, you know, basically looking for the circle. You know, is this a product? Is this something I'm going to turn something else into? And of course, that's just good old-fashioned recycling, reducing, and repurposing our waste. And so we just use different phrases, different words. So again, get that kind of communications help that you need in order to make your product pop for the EU market, and understand, of course, French taste, Czech taste. You know, it's those chambers of commerce, local, who can, you know, you're Canadian, but then partnering with their European counterpart that can help you with that. And I think the third and final thing is, you know, make sure that you understand the potential legal liability. We talked about it, the certification, those elements for your product, and a free source to start in understanding how you can start at the EU 27, the entire EU market level, and work your way down is, of course, you know, through the Trade Commissioner Service. We can provide, if you will, market agnostic, right, advice. Where is the demand for your product? Where's the best place to start for your business? And then make some recommendations based on what we know about the various markets. And here's a challenge. If you're working with a trade commissioner or any of the amazing service providers from, for example, our Export Development Bank, Export Development Canada, or BDC, whatever they recommend, make sure you push them and say, okay, that's this recommendation. Where's my next market? What's the next place I should go to? And there, you know, there always should be an answer to that. And, you know, to build, I think is one of my final points here, to weave together a number of themes of the conversation. This is what digital and a truly digital Europe, but also effective governments would provide. We've really got to become more client-centric as a government, as teams, and understand the value that we can provide to citizens. And in that sense, I think the opportunity is for us to join. We've got a digital group of countries. It includes Baltic countries like Estonia. It includes Asian countries. These are nations that are really ready to get to the forefront of providing services in as seamless and coordinated. And trust me, I know if you're a small business, you're saying, I see lots of opportunities for you to better bring together your services and better partner with the private sector. And I can't agree more. I think we've got a lot of opportunity. And the last year, if there's any silver lining, it's that we know we have to keep pushing ourselves as, in my case, a public servant in providing those digital services to business. That, I hope, could take some of the sting out of Brexit, if you'll allow me. I think one of my roles is to very clearly say, we're going to keep up a strong transatlantic partnership. We'll never choose between our friends. Of course, my job is to promote and deepen our ties with the European Union. But again, we have this opportunity, if we're focused on the customer as well as on the client, to make all of this kind of a bigger marketplace and a bigger piece of value proposition. So we buy down the costs for small business to become exporters. That's going to be absolutely critical to the recovery in Canada and the recovery here in Europe, across France, Germany, the South, Italy, everywhere. We're all going to need to think bigger and with more purpose. And, you know, if our services are smart enough and fast enough for the recovery that we know we need.
You're absolutely right. And I think it's important to point out that small businesses need to be able to trade like the big ones, because they don't have the same team of lawyers, they don't have the same experience. But hopefully everyone here can see that there are experts who are here and readily available to help everyone trade across Europe and Canada and really exchange and ideas and expertise, and living in this sort of more virtual world. Well, actually we can exchange information a lot quicker. So definitely is seeing this as an opportunity and going forward on this. So now I'm just going to double check if there are some questions from the panel, which, yeah, Andrea, please.
Yes. Can I want to reply to a couple of questions. Really.
Please do.
So one is concerning FDI and the consequences of Brexit, whether basically, you know, foreign direct investments will go from the UK to continental Europe. And we can see already that, you know, companies are deciding to locate outside the UK, for instance, in Ireland, to tack or to enter in the European market. And not only Ireland, but of course, the Netherlands, you know, is also very attractive for tax and other reasons. So we see that foreign direct investments and companies, because of Brexit, are choosing to come to Europe. And the second one that I wanted to answer is the question about ratification of CETA. You know, of course, we are all frustrated because it's not there yet, ratified everywhere. But on the other end, I think the opportunity is that we can go, and there should be somebody doing that, to every single parliament where it has to be debated and explain at national level what and which are the benefits of the CETA. This is an opportunity because we have seen what happened when we wanted to have the CETA. You know, people going ballistic for no reason at all. And that actually gives us the reason why we should